Hey, hey, hey. Welcome, welcome, welcome. It's another Masters of Flow summer talk. We're on the edge of summer. So close that it's almost a dream. And so
Mm.
yeah, so I'm joined by Victoria Davis and we're talking flow with meditation practice. And it's absolutely fascinating. I could probably talk about this for 3 days. Uh, it's fascinating from my perspective of before I didn't believe I could meditate in a way that was supposed to be sitting still kind of meditation practices. So I've learned how to modify that and then teach that back around as well because I think it's a massive key piece to making
Mm.
anything happen to do with well-being. Um, in actual what actually helps with chronic health and chronic productivity as well.
Mm.
So,
Great.
Victoria, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. My name is Victoria Davis. I founded and operate a company called Wellspring Mind that teaches mental balancing practices that very much incorporates flow both in a one-on-one setting and in the corporate profession.
Amazing. Awesome. 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 And we met on the wonderful Flow Research Collective
We did.
um, Flow course. And yeah, so it's, yeah, where do we go from here? I've got some great ideas to reflect on this. But firstly, because we're going quite broad in funneling it through,
Yeah.
what's your experience with meditation practice
Mm.
that aligns with you the most?
Sure. So my experience with meditation itself is quite broad and has really kind of funneled down. I started meditating in 2012 because well, and I'll tag this one because it just ended. I did not attend this year and have not for many years, but I went to Burning Man when I was in my very early 20s before it kind of hit its biggest boom, and I had a terrible time, which is not the common experience, right? And I kind of came back and I realized from that experience that I had no idea who I was, and but beneath kind of like the New York City, just like being that person and knowing that person and all of this very like superficial identity creating perspectives that I was really leaning into. I had no idea who I was. And I really didn't have anything to lay my own grounding. And that all became very clear to me when people um, were not interested in the veneer, right? I grew up on a farm in the Midwest of the US and kind of then came to New York, and I just knew that I was different. I was doing something different, and all the things that had happened to me had happened for a reason. So I was taking all this external stuff and like making it, the things that I was building my own blocks upon to create this grounding to then build my own skyscraper, right? But then when I really kind of looked at things, I was like, everything that I've ever done is built on sand. And it's built on sand because I don't know the inner workings of my own mind. I don't know what's important to me. I don't really know where my values lie. And when this became very real to me in such a way where it was like people were asking me questions about myself and the way I feel about things, and I didn't know the answer to it because it wasn't for anything else. So then when I came back, I was 23, I think, when I kind of looked in the mirror and I was like, what's underneath all that is such a level of unhappiness and just absolute chaos that there's no way I'm going to make it to 30 unless I figure this out. So I started meditating. There was I literally encountered my sign that said 8 a.m. meditation here. And it was a center that was teaching meditation, but then rooted in Tibetan Buddhism that I began attending a couple times a week and then more frequently. And then I met my heart teacher, and then, that broad perspective filtered and filtered and filtered and filtered. And now I teach. This is what I do every day. I started Wellspring 6 years ago. And we've been kind of taking this model of just It's a very simple model, really. I call it a model as though there are so many layers to it, but really it's not. It's just taking the lens and going from the external perspective to turning that inward and looking at ourselves, asking these baseline questions that have so much to do with flow, and just saying, who am I really? What is my value? What is my perspective? Like, and then where are the gaps in all of that? Like, how can I understand my subjective experience to such a degree that not only is sort of what's appearing externally to me very clear, but it's also really clear to me what sort of layers and veils I'm putting upon that. So then I can begin to understand the perspective of someone else. And my emotional understanding from an internal and an external perspective becomes way more clear, even within my own kind of prejudices and my own biases and my own experience. As long as I'm clear on what I'm creating, then oftentimes the outcome is much more is not just much more identifiable, but it's much more I guess it's much more clear. It's much more clear, and it all has to do with self-understanding, just turning and looking inward.
Mm, thanks for sharing. That's yeah. Um, it's hearing the contrast of it, where well, there's the similarities of
Mm,
seeing myself and feeling like I was completely broken when I was
mhm,
in my early 20s, and
mhm,
it was fascinating that what I'm hearing you say, because there's two elements that what how I've started to understand about meditation
mhm,
being one passive, and it's far from passive in terms of the mind, but it's and then active. And what I heard about active, because again I could not sort of comprehend sitting still and trying to clear my mind kind of thing. And you know, in fact, my mum took me to like a meditation practice when I was really, really young, and I just remember getting a meditation word, and then I was given that, and I still remember it, and I keep coming back. I can remember keep coming back to it and going, oh yeah. I remember that, but I just left it alone as well because it didn't really resonate. I couldn't see how to do it, or maybe I was in flow with who I thought I was at the
mhm.
time, and then I
Right,
was frustrated with a system,
right.
and all the stuff around intelligence and not being able to
Mhm.
do stuff at school in the way that I
Sure.
wanted to, or the way that it was graded. And so all of that
Right.
stuff culminated in struggle and mental breakdown when I was in my 20s. But no, but the reason I was saying that is that throughout that whole time, music was my passion and my purpose.
Yeah.
And I would say that I was using it actively to.
Mm.
And so when I say active meditation, the way I like to describe that as a piece of that I picked up the guitar from the age of 16 and just was regulating my nervous system because I didn't know how to
Yeah.
communicate ideas or voice. So I was playing the over and over again for 8 hours a day sometimes, just to feel regulated and in flow,
Yeah.
keeping my mind on flow, um,
Yeah.
and build a skill. And I was loving doing it. So the reason why I'm saying all of that is it's the contrast in there's the similarities of the breakdown before a breakthrough
Mhm.
and finding out about meditation, but I didn't much until much later get into the idea of being able to get into passive meditation, which again, the way I would describe that is it's sitting with listening to stillness as a contrast to what thoughts and feelings are coming through that I'm experiencing from my my being. And so
Mm.
I couldn't do any of that before. So I was actively meditating. I was like staying focused on what I could do with moving, dancing, listening, and playing. And so that's what would call until recently. I can go into that in a bit, but that was what I called active meditation then. And that's only just touching the start of this conversation, I guess. But that point of reference, I just thought I resonated with that breakdown, breakthrough, but I came from a point of having to stay active to stay in the moment,
Mhm.
and be in the
Mhm.
moment, enjoy the moment. And so, yeah, I'm
Mm.
curious as to as you shared about actually going to a teacher and learning it at that time
Hmm.
from well, I would say it feels like from a public point of view, that's what people would tend to do if they wanted to go and learn meditation. They'd find a teacher and sit there and learn
Yeah.
it. And it's more
Yeah.
sitting in stillness. So, but yeah, I'd love to know what comes to you around that practice that you did learn, and potentially how it's changed over the years.
Sure, sure. So when I initially started meditating, the psychotherapeutic ailments that I was kind of juggling were obsessive compulsive disorder, PTSD, generalized anxiety disorder, and I'd been struggling with OCD since I think I was diagnosed at 9, and for me, that comes out in a much more kind of very related to Tourette syndrome in that way. So a lot of more like tic-like behaviors, whether that would be like the classic one would be like checking your apartment door, right? I think we hear this a lot. Like I have to run back upstairs to make sure I turned off my curling iron, or checking the apartment door 6 times, even though that you know that you've already checked it, right? For me as well, that might be like twitches in my face, or having to do one thing multiple times, even though we know that we've done it. And so that becomes interesting. And even when I hear you mention this idea of what I hear you calling active meditation, I would probably call that more meditative movement, where it's like, how can we bring as much intentionality into this repetitive, compulsive, obsessive behavior that for me, from an OCD perspective, I need to repeat. So it's a tick that I have to repeat. And I'm calling it a tick because then it becomes sort of involuntary, right? So from that perspective, then, how do we begin to deal with this? And that's where I think of things like meditative movement or mindful movement, where it's kind of like, all right, can I interrupt this involuntary flow that is just this repetition and kind of interrupt that process? And that is what I ended up learning over time, right? With something like PTSD, where there would be sort of this chronic nervous system imbalance, that would be there'd be an external trigger, and then my entire system would kind of go into a state of shock. And for anyone watching who's ever experienced any sort of post-traumatic stress, it's like we can really recognize when it's like the heart begins to go and we're sweating, and it's like, and sometimes it's much more dramatic than that, right? How do we work our way out of that when no one else around us knows what's going on and wonders like why we're having this really seemingly anxiety driven sort of response to something that is so small, right? And then generalized anxiety, unfortunately, so many people deal with this now. I imagine most people know what I'm talking about when I speak to that. So when I walked into the meditative space, sitting still for me was the biggest challenge. And I learned very quickly that level one in beginning to meditate is simply just attending to the breath. Because sometimes without attending to the breath, which is what I call the bridge between the body and the mind, it's how we really connect those two so that the mind begins to understand the signals of the body, and then the body can begin to interpret in a very physical, somatic way what the mind is trying to share, right? PTSD is really a stress issue because the mind and the body are not communicating in a way that is simpatico. They're kind of speaking different languages to each other, saying, "Why don't you understand me?" That's been my experience. And so, what I learned sitting in meditation is that if it is true that every exhale allows me to get to a deeper level of relaxed ease, and every inhale serves the purpose of balancing so that I don't fall asleep, and then elongating my exhale lets me relax a little bit deeper. And regulating that inhale keeps me in this beautiful balance. Okay, maybe I can just use that in all of these different arenas where my actions are compulsive and obsessive, or my mind is going haywire and I don't know why. And that applies for both PTSD and anxiety, right? It's like, how can I begin to use that, whether I'm seated or actively in motion in an urban space, to begin to regulate my system? And then the stillness becomes a readily available option, right? If I can't sit with my own breath, whether I'm sitting, standing, or walking, then I'm really going to have a hard time sitting in meditation because that is the predominant movement that happens with the stillness. And I think what you bring forth, this idea of the movement of the mind and the movement of what is happening within the stillness of this physically present space, that becomes the real balance. How do we sit in the stillness and observe the movement that's happening within and around us? And I think that was a really important point that you made. Whether we're in the space of meditative movement or mindful movement or this active meditation, as I heard you speaking about it, or whether we're sitting with our mind, there's still an active aspect while there is a stillness happening.
Yes. Love it.
Yeah.
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 Mm, my journey with studying osteopathy as well around this
Mm.
holistic what healing is
Yeah.
and the science behind healing and the philosophies of it was transferable from my understanding around the bridge of the
Hmm.
breath,
Hmm.
helping the nervous system to focus on something and that bringing things together. And you mentioned this motor, like what we call motor and sensory
Hmm.
experiences. And so if I can notice that I'm sensing everything or
Hmm.
sensing things, the feelings,
Hmm. Yeah.
what's coming into my attention,
Yeah.
and then the motor is always happening at the same time, which
Right.
is to hold the position of that focus. So even the motor
Hmm.
is potentially the idea of what mental muscles are being held on
Hmm.
is if you're talking about mind, mental muscles or physical muscles to hold the posture.
Hmm. Hmm.
Even stillness, I'm holding myself in a particular posture
Right.
where the
Right.
brain is always on. So that's that sense of like mindfulness is that idea of choosing which one to focus on or both, and noticing that one's happening or the other, that in and out is happening at the same time, and whether it's more active or more passive is the question. And so yeah,
Mm.
I love what you're sharing about that. Um oh, there's so many things I wanted to bring up around this, but uh what is it? We also said there was the I wanted to also bring in this idea that that was my previous experience of what I thought
Hmm.
meditation was. I just named it
Hmm.
like, oh yeah, I'm meditating, but I can only do it.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
now that I've done a lot more research and practice into it, and then I'm just and the flow kind of comes in, the flow science and the trick teach
Hmm.
we can tap into a little bit here as well.
Yeah.
Sort of brings the bonds of the theory and the practice of it being passive, and then
Hmm.
what I call active meditation,
Hmm.
being to listen and almost defragment uh, the head brain and the logic brain and get out of the stories. Um, getting out of the story of and noticing it and creating a space for curiosity and
Hmm.
de um or de removing the judge, removing the inner critic or noticing the inner
Yeah.
critic coming along is one piece that I would say active's great. And then the other side of that being now that I what I call active is what is potentially called mental rehearsal in terms of preemptive work in meditating on what I want to create
Hmm.
forward. So it's very different to being okay with whatever's being experienced and
Yes.
having attachment to the past or the future, but then
Right.
active is actually to me is actively reflecting on what I don't want to happen so that I can learn. It's a learning process. It's actually an active bond.
Hmm.
Well, again, I'm curious about what
Hmm.
you class that as meditation or not, but that idea of when it's become popular, it's trending to
Hmm.
a guided meditation, which actually has people think of concepts that they hadn't thought of,
Right.
and trying to remove all sense of self, which
Yeah.
is called passive now. So I'm curious around this, what I would call passive being removing the sense of self to be okay with letting go of stuff
Hmm.
and processing all the stuff, and then processing also what to create in life through learning,
Hmm.
reattaching a sense of intention and commitment to something going forwards.
Hmm.
Yeah. Two.
Yeah. Sure. So the way that I tend to I'm going to answer this in two ways. So from the way that I teach meditation itself and from the Buddhist perspective and my understanding in my study is we can kind of say that there are three sort of types of meditation, and this is the way that I teach it. There's what's called shamatha, vipassana, and then these heart opening practices. Shamatha, directly translated from Sanskrit, essentially just means calm abiding, but that's kind of like a misleading term. So, calm abiding in itself basically just means we're working to relax the body so that we can hone our attention to begin to really, it's like cleansing the telescope, like wiping off the the glass portion of a telescope so that we can see really clearly what's happening before us. Because if we don't have the ability to focus our attention in a relaxed and grounded way, it doesn't really matter what presents itself. We're not going to see it correctly. Right. So that is shamatha. We're working with both attention and awareness. And I'm going to come back to that because that's a really important aspect in a relaxed and grounded way. And then vipassana or vipassana, it's the same word just from different traditional Indian languages. Vipassana really just means asking a question where we're digging into the nature of reality. So anything that focuses on a concept itself and kind of says, but what is that? In this concept of self, it's maybe a little bit less, there is no self, and a little bit more, well, if this is my mind, where can I find the mind? Does it have a shape? Does it have a color? What does my mean? If this is my body, right? And I give a kidney to Rory, that is that still mine? But I gave it to you. Was it ever mine? Am I then complete? Am I incomplete? Right. And so then we can break things down in that way. And that would be categorized as Vipassana, digging into the nature of reality. And then these heart opening practices in this arena within which I teach, we work on compassion, which is wishing that myself and all living beings no longer experience suffering or its causes. Loving kindness, may you be happy. Equanimity, may you experience this equipoise, be it good or bad, it's fine, right? And then the empathetic joy, which means when something good happens to you, I am genuinely happy for that goodness, right? So this really comes back to what we might consider ethics, right? In a secular way, ethics does not have to be dogmatically tied to any religion. Ethics, I hope, from a more spiritual perspective, just means may you do well and may I do well. And may we all be happy and free, something like that, right? And so these three arenas, these three sort of pillars, you can think on them like, think of it like legs of a stool, right? A stool doesn't stand on two legs, but it kind of needs the three. So within that space, when we have this sort of worldview that very much encompasses ethics, and then the skillful means, which could be like shamatha, right? How does my attention actually operate? And can I focus even enough to gain what you're saying, Rory, to be able to answer with some level of wisdom? And hopefully, then that wisdom would be like Vipassana, coming from recognizing and looking very clearly at what the true nature of reality is as per my experience, right? So I need to have this worldview that wants well for you and me. And I need to really shine that lens, clean that lens so that I can see things clearly, such that I can ask the right questions and be present for their answers, right?
Mm.
So that's the first part of that answer. Can I share the second part?
Yeah, go for it.
So this is what really hooked me when my heart teacher was talking about the difference between attention and awareness. In current psychiatry and psychology, I believe this is still referred to as localized attention and global attention. And this is all in the shamatha that shamatha pocket, where we're working on, can I actually focus my attention? And that takes very much three steps. We have to learn to relax first so that we can focus, so that we can begin to broaden out to see distractions before they arise, right? So it's kind of that third pillar. It's relax first. This is where the sand becomes stable ground, right? That's how we relax. And then we begin to build. Focused attention is what we often refer to when we're working with the breath, right? So if you've ever sat with a teacher who's saying, now focus on your breath, just feel the breath as it comes in and comes out. That's an attention-based practice, localized attention, where anything outside of this object becomes distraction. And that's very functional. And it's one type of attention. The other primary type of attention that I call awareness is much more left hemisphere, excuse me, is much more right hemisphere. Left hemisphere is localized attention in almost everyone. Right hemisphere is the more broad scope attention, and this is where flow comes in. This awareness aspect, this global attention, is able to be present as things happen without grabbing on to anything and running away with it. And this is really where I think most of modern society struggles, myself included, where we tend to call things attentional disorders, like attention deficit disorder. I actually think it's an awareness deficit disorder because our attention gloms onto something and then runs away. And then we're like, oh, when did that happen? Well, my still awareness wasn't strong enough to keep me here as that thing was about to distract me. So then I get pummeled in the face, and then I'm confused when I end up in Timbuktu, right? When I have this memory of a trip I took 12 years ago, and I'm meant to be in this conversation. That was my initial intention. So, working on that awareness itself, where we sit in the stillness of awareness and just watch the whether it be external if our eyes are open while we're meditating, or what's happening in our minds, or the changing sensations in our body, just like appearances in a parade, right? The appearances of the mind are like appearances in a parade, and we begin to sense when I have an emotion about something, then it's no longer this objective appearance, this objective reality of that which is happening in front of me. When I have feedback about what's happening, that's a secondary aspect. I'm starting to glom on to this idea, and then we have the potential of that kind of snake hole happening, right? Where it's just like and there's the spiral. And this is where things like general anxiety disorder happens. This is what happens with PTSD. This is what happens with depression. This is what happens with a lot of these mental ailments where we just find something, hold on to it, and we keep going. And now I'm not trying to simplify the nature or say that these things are not big deals. They are extremely challenging. And so often when we really struggle with something, it's because we jump into the parade with that appearance itself. And in so doing, we replant it. It's like a movie reel, right? The reel is going and the reel is going. And then we take that portion of the reel and we back it up. So then it restarts. And that happens because I grabbed it and I brought it back to the front just by grabbing it. And the ability to kind of recognize my own tendency to say, oh, that feels challenging because now I feel the challenge. Can I release that, ideally on an exhale, and just let it pass into its natural life cycle?
Love it, love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. I hope that was insightful for everyone watching as well. If you got any questions or highlights or even and what I call or not I call, but the reason why the what is deemed important, what is deemed important gets focused on in that moment. And so if there's something that someone finds interesting and useful, that's insightful, that's progressive, rather than like what I don't want this, I don't want this, I don't want this, I don't want this, I don't want this happening, I don't
Mhm,
want, and repeating that is creating those bonds in the brain. And there's that idea of the is it called general adaptation syndrome or the general I can't remember the term, but it's about the exponential learning curve. The exponential learning
mhm,
is where if something's repeated a second and then 2 seconds and then
mhm,
and so some
mhm,
negative happens and it's so profound for the person, it's so important for it to not happen again that it's
mhm,
repeated, it becomes a memory, it becomes a bond, and it keeps being repeated. It's
mhm,
for positive aspects and where we do want to go. And so if there was anything that you liked what Victoria said, as soon as you repeat it back and type it or even say it or whatever, it really helps to reinforce something,
Hmm.
to remember it. So it's
Yeah,
like, often there's that negative bias of the mind that will want to repeat that thing in order to for it to not
right,
happen. But that's the paradox of I don't want it to happen. I don't want it to happen, and it's repeated
right,
in the mind, which then it starts to be remembered more, like you were just sharing
right.
as well. So just inviting to notice, highlights, questions, and things, and sharings is all. If this is interesting, the algorithms will share it with other people that find it interesting too. So it's not just about us asking this, but it's really, I think it's important to bear in mind that, and I like to remind people that if there was something really fascinating, you can just repeat it back. That was fascinating, repeat these things out, and it's what will help spread awesomeness in
Mm.
awareness piece, the awareness piece.
Yeah. And Rory, that makes me think, right? This big flow concept is we have to keep our attention guided, right? So what's the reason we're doing things? And in this program you and I took together, right? Like this level of what are these high hard goals that we have, right? What is the reason that we're making these choices? This was a big perspective, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. And so when we sit in meditation, even when these hard things come up, because it will happen, and I would say unfortunately, but that is the nature of our minds. The average person is way more negative than they are positive, and it's just because that's our survival bias. It's the way we're designed to operate. This is a threat, right? So I'm more likely to put more attention on that than the thing that is good for me. Right? Than the thing that is just pleasant, right? Than how lovely this green tea is. If there were an eagle that started to fly toward my window, my entire attention would be here instead of how pleasant this green tea is, right? Just in case, the glass were to break and it were to land on me, right? Something like this. So that example, right, is used because it's when these negative things happen with us, whether we're meditating or in any part of life, then reminding, taking the exhale to release that feeling, that negativity, and then saying, here we are. I am present, and this is why I'm choosing this, right? And the more we do this, as you were saying, the more we do this, the more quickly this happens. That repeating process of what is my great intention? Why am I actually here? We release it to relax into the space that we are present and then remind ourselves of, oh, this is why I'm here. And then we bring it back because that negativity is going to be present, right? Whether it's you imagine yourself punching your younger brother, if my younger brother is watching, I'm not planning to do that. It's like whether you imagine yourself punching your younger brother or you imagine yourself doing something really violent. That was very much my early meditation experience, right? All these violent images were coming up, and then it's, am I a bad person for this? Well, no, it's just what's present. And this is also where I think mm, a diversion can be made from this idea of just being mindfully aware of anything that comes up without preference. That's okay to some degree. But then also when we have these ideas that are not beneficial for someone else or for ourselves, when we allow them to be what they are, and then just allow them to pass, like that appearance in a parade, right? Noticing the judgment that arises as a secondary appearance and still just allowing that to be, maintaining this witnessing distance, the awareness that is still as all this stuff is happening. And I even notice my hatred of that thought, and even perhaps in that moment, my hatred of myself. Can I just allow that to be without glomming onto it and making it something massive?
Mm, love it, love it, love it, love it. It's really reminding me of what helped me as well along the way, that piece in between what I can do now with what I describe as the visualizing what I want to create, active meditation,
Hmm.
um, is the the mental fitness work that I study,
Hmm.
coming through understanding and learning about coaching and having some coaching and mental fitness training. It's boiled down to keeping it really simple in a lot of ways. Uh,
Hmm.
and one of the things is it's called is the self command muscle.
Hmm.
So what you were sharing around just practicing coming into the senses, the mindfulness aspect, but not just doing mindfulness, but also learning to apply it to the stresses, the difficulties, the challenges, not just using it as a practice to I want to calm down and be away from the stress, but also bring the self-command muscle to the repeated things that come up around the challenges. So the self-command,
Mhm.
the oh yeah, like you just said, that judgment process when someone's there and it happens in that moment to be able to have techniques and tools to
Mhm.
micro meditations, micro
Mhm.
mindfulness practices for
Mhm.
just 30 seconds to 2 minutes, and how much I found that so important for me to access, being able to
Mhm.
start
Mhm.
to do the other practices like the like you said about the heart opening practices and the layers, what I call the layers of that consciousness that you
Mhm.
also shared was fascinating. That I see the idea of like when we're completely in flow and unaware of ourselves,
Mhm.
we're almost like in the zero, that
Right.
before the I, and when
Right.
we go I,
Right.
that's actually a level that even though that's what I've heard is like just being the I is part of the consciousness, but actually I still think that that's still have to be a person to be able to say I, and that therefore is in some way you have to or
Yeah.
yeah, so that I becoming an I and recognizing an I in awareness before
Mhm.
then noticing what that's connected to,
Mhm.
either create as a noticing of um what I would call where people have, and I hear sort of demonizings of the
Mhm.
ego being always bad. And yet, for me, that layer of ego is still part of being a person. To
Yeah.
go, I still
Yeah.
is part of the ego. And so there's
Yeah.
this shades of like ego that doesn't judge,
Yeah.
that's I, is more
Yeah.
still discerning, and through to judgment of a process, and then making that fixed into something either negative, causing mental
Yeah.
scatter, stress, overwhelm,
Yeah.
repeatedness
Yeah.
of the difficulties or challenges, through to the I being aware of the I, and then, like you say, coming back to neutral. And I don't just mean that as in feeling, not just seeing neutral, but also feeling neutral
Mhm.
is an emotional charge to it. So doing it enough to
Mhm.
become emotionally charged as neutral is
Right.
essential before even starting to go, what do I do
Mhm.
want instead of what
Right.
I don't want, to actually access the heart.
Right.
It's just like all the what is
Right.
called the ego
Right.
often, which is balloons apparently.
Yay!
Yeah. So yeah. I don't know whether you want to share anything. I've got one other thing I wanted to come round to around all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I I think we can use things like hedonia, right? This idea of like we hear about the hedonic treadmill, right? We're making more money so that we can get a better partner, so that we can have a better life. But what does better actually mean, right? When everything has this superficial bias, right? That is just more stuff and accumulation, right? That would be in the camp of hedonia, right? Whereas eudaimonia, which is an ancient Greek term that just means genuine happiness, it means happiness for sake of happiness itself, right? That is not based on anything that is external or anything that is to be externally accumulated. It's more of an internal cultivation. When we use hedonic understanding, which is like I, me, mine, like this shirt I purchased for myself, this tea I made for myself, right? These are all hedonic pleasures because I enjoy them that are in some way serving the I, right? And if these things were then purchased or accumulated to have this conversation, which for me is about genuine happiness, to have this conversation, which I hope is helpful to someone else because it's certainly helpful to me and I hope helpful to you, right? If those things are used for this greater purpose of eudaimonia, of genuine happiness, then there's absolutely nothing wrong with the ego saying, hey, I could use a cup of water. I could use a tea, right? Because they're for a greater purpose. And I really think that that's where things like ethics that are not dogmatically related to religion, that's where things like that come in. Right. That's where we then look at the open heart. Is my heart open or closed? Do I genuinely long for your happiness and my own? Do I want you to be free of suffering and its causes? And do I want that for myself? Am I happy when you're happy? Am I okay with this neutrality that you were talking about? Right? If the good, may the bad come, I'm going to be okay regardless. Like, I really think that that's where it ties together. And I completely agree with what you're saying.
Mm. Wonderful. So what I'm hearing from all of this is a sense of where someone may be at, where they think that they can't meditate or that they get into flow, which is
Hmm.
there's a thing of getting into it can be an unawareness of a dark sense of flow. There's that side of dark side of flow, which could be
Hmm.
unhealthy and uh,
Hmm.
in an automated process of
Sure.
addictive habits.
Yeah.
Don't even realize they're doing it straight away to
Yeah.
becoming like unconsciously incompetent at something that they do want to
Right.
be at. And so that
Right.
to what really helped me was that self-command muscle practice to just keep practicing that every single day, 4 times a day, until it became like, oh, I'm actually doing it automatically.
Hmm.
To new
Hmm.
before I could even start inventing
Hmm.
what I did want from a space of again, but with a set with that sense of genuine happiness
Hmm.
is just where I'm only just starting to be able to get into.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
like everything is there to get into flow with, or to not allow.
Hmm.
Do I let it in and play around with it, or do I not?
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
it becomes what I call. Well, that's not what I call it. I learned from the heart-centered leadership trainings was to become responsible for all of that, and that was ingrained in me from a quite a hardcore respected way of doing it. We declared something, and it went against my identity, but I still had to
Hmm.
stick to doing it to
Right.
could be my word.
Right.
So that was a whole different. That's the whole different thing. But coming back to the idea of it being learning to have the choice to feel and not react in that way
Hmm.
is a muscle in itself. It's a repeatable muscle. So again, I'm just repeating things back just so that if anyone's watching that goes, okay, oh yeah, I'm in this space and if I just focus on this step, just becoming more neutral, or if I'm now in this space, neutral space, it's actually what's possible to go from even just
Hmm.
this is my life and what do I do with it now kind of thing. There's so much more to explore and always exploration, that sense of curiosity.
Hmm.
Uh,
Hmm.
and yeah, and the last piece around what I was going to bring around was what I learned from the osteopathic treatment to put hands on someone and the difference between if I was thinking there's even science research around what intention is. So the idea of having an intention for an action can make that action way more functional, powerful, or what
Hmm.
than
Hmm.
having the mind somewhere else whilst doing that.
Right.
So
Right.
and so I wanted to bring that in because it's almost like in the intention to actively create something with genuine
Yeah.
happiness is
Right.
is awesome and it's possible and it's that
Yeah.
sense of that when that feeds back round to the intention feeds it's when someone gets their intention in alignment with what they want to create
Yeah. Yeah.
to getting committed to the
Right.
actions to make that happen through their uncomfortability
Right.
of all the stuff that comes up from their past that you know
Right.
that will get in the way of taking that action to make it happen.
Right.
And so
Right.
we following through on that commitment to creating it, it comes back round and feeds back the intention. So when you said about the downward spiral that can happen for
Hmm.
things, if even putting on the brakes, it can be the opposite. So it's
Right.
that tension followed by evidence of commitment, action, evidence of results of that intention and commitment
Hmm.
background, and then it starts to
Hmm.
something
Hmm.
more desirable.
Mm. And I would even say just approaching with curiosity, with the motivation. And if there's one thing to take away from this conversation, I hope that it's to really explore the gap, and it's the gap, it's that spark between the feeling and the action. There's this tiny gap that then becomes larger and larger over time, where there's this appearance in the mind or this thing that happens out here, and then there's a feeling about it. And those two things, and this is what I hope we can explore with curiosity. Those two things are actually not adhered. They are not intricately connected. They're not adhesively connected. They are intricately connected, but they don't actually touch. They're not the same thing, right? And if we just take that as a working hypothesis that we then begin to explore with curiosity, we might be able to see that boss that we hate, or that partner that's the worst, or that apartment that you can no longer live in, right? Whatever your current experience is that just feels like the worst, can we begin to sit with that experience or any other and then see the gap between that objective experience and the reality that it holds itself, and then the emotion that arises thereafter? And once we begin to recognize that these two do not occur the same way for everyone, that these two are not actually connected and arising simultaneously, that's all the potential, right? That's the potential within which we can actually operate. We can choose to respond instead of react. And the longer we look at these things, the more familiar we get with our mind, the more we strengthen that muscle, the wider that gap becomes, and the more space we have to do something different.
I love it. Do something different. I've got one thing that I want, a golden nugget that comes from that, but I just noticed that Clarissa said, oh, "Yay, awareness deficit." So yeah, that's resonating. That's really resonating. Like to change that up and really understand that we can reframe,
Mm,
like you just said. It's not then
yeah,
we can reframe whatever we want to reframe,
yeah,
as
yeah, yeah.
long as we notice that.
Right.
And that's what I call know your ABCs, which is awareness brings choice. And so,
Yeah, yeah,
so we're practicing on that awareness, noticing what, as soon as we're aware of it, we can have the choice. If we don't, then we're in the flow of the negative or the positive.
right, right, right,
We choose what to set up
right.
in advance so that we can,
Yeah.
that's where the flow training comes in to play.
Yeah.
And yeah, to know your ABCs so you can know your DSDs, do something different
Yeah.
if necessary, or do the
If
same.
necessary. Yeah. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Before we round it up, I just thought we've gone round all the different ways in which
Hmm.
where there could be areas for improvement or not improvement, and things are going well. And what would you say around applying, creating a meditation practice, not from scratch, but from a space of wherever someone's at in their journey
Hmm.
of meditation, realizing that there's always more, or that it's either maintenance or it's growth or it's letting go, and it's a constant, it's like if I don't stop lifting that weight,
Hmm.
if I stop lifting that weight, then it's use it or lose it kind of thing. It's all
Hmm. Yeah.
constant practice. And so
Right.
and so from wherever someone's at with their what they want to do with their meditation, the intention of it, what do you say is your experience, or how would you speak into understanding that sort of idea of the struggle phase of trying to do something new with it
Yeah.
in in the daily practice of understanding the struggle phase into getting into a flow with meditation and then
Sure.
out of it again as well?
Yeah. Now, what I see with a lot of people, and tell me if this answer responds to the question presented here. What I see with a lot of people is that they begin to get discouraged when they're a couple days off. Well, I didn't have 15 minutes or 20 minutes, and so I'll get back into it. I'll get back into it. And what I consistently say, as I've shared with you, Ori, anytime that, someone else tells me I have to do something, there is very much this revolting teenager inside me that's like, no, I'm going to do it my way. Right. And if that is subversively operating or very much at the fore operating for anyone, where it's like, I really struggle with this consistent practice, doing it the same way all the time, then don't do it the same way all the time. And what I mean by that is if you notice that you're, you're dog tired or you're on your way home and you think, I can't bear the thought of doing anything other than hitting my bed when I get home, on your way home, is it possible to stand where you're standing if you're on a subway or something similar, if you're on the tube, right? Or sit where you're sitting. Take 3 deep breaths with yourself, being very present when you take those breaths. And on every exhale, you know you're achieving a deeper layer of relaxation. And then feel your feet, or if you're sitting down, feel your seat, feel the earth, feel the ground. This is that solid element that is always supporting us. And then feel the breath. That's the motion, the movement we've been talking about, the stillness of earth and the movement of space, of air. And there's the presence, right? That can take 3 minutes or less, but it's a very intentional turning inward by maintaining presence. And so what I just said was taking 3 breaths to relax tension. We're intentionally releasing tension from the body, grounding our physical bodies in the stillness of earth itself, and then maintaining presence with the movement of the breath. Movement is very beautifully represented by breath because we can feel the changing sensations. And then allow that to be until the mind says, I am complete. And you might find, this has been my personal experience, that if you just do that, you might end up being present there for 20 minutes. Because sometimes it's the knowing that I have to arrive here that prevents us from even starting, right? But when it's, I'm going to go with this for as long as I'm able to, and that might look like 90 seconds, right? And it might look like 29 minutes. Whatever it is going to be fine. So I think it's really kind of when we're not feeling it, just keep the barrier for entry as low as possible. Grab the low hanging fruit and you might start climbing.
Incredible. Amazing, amazing, amazing. Yeah, and the word no came to mind just then, as in to know what to do, and that
Mhm.
idea of the just that little bit of insight, that knowledge
Yeah,
that it doesn't it's that knowledge of it doesn't take much to do
right,
a particular
right,
thing, and just
right.
know that, and then that knowing is almost connected to creating sense of trust, which then creates a sense of safety. And
And that's it. Exactly. And the more we see ourselves do something, the more comfortable we are doing that thing we're already familiar with, right?
mm,
How many times a day do you brush your teeth and you don't think about it because you know how to do it? And you've done it how many times over the course of how many decades, right? Meditation becomes like that much more extremely quickly, right? And for anyone who's done anything, whether you're an athlete as a child or into your adult years, the more you've done something, the more natural it is to do. And meditation is no different at all.
amazing, amazing, amazing. It's so funny that what you just touched upon there was actually a funny example because of the neurodivergence that I experience is every all the usual routine stuff. It has to be repeated and remembered to do.
Hmm.
It's almost like
Hmm.
it's new. Everything's new all
Hmm.
the time, and so
Hmm.
that's another conversation of in itself. That's why I said to go on to like for another 3 days.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's fascinating that some brains can love the structure and get into things like
Hmm.
whereas like the things that potentially are more tricky for some people, like say for instance, picking up something and just repeating it, repeating it, repeating it, and not analyzing themselves whilst they do it, so that they
Right.
build a skill and master a skill is something that some level of neurodivergence in a certain perspective, certain group can do that quite easily. But yeah, it's the little tasks that don't repeat very
So,
often.
yeah, Roy, you know then what I would say to that for those who are in that camp, see if you can just breathe without controlling your breath in any way.
Mm.
And the the genuine challenge of not of maintaining presence with an unadulterated breath is is extremely challenging. And it is such a simple task. Repeat the same thing over and over and over again, and you'll start to notice that every breath is a little bit different, and I'm probably controlling some aspect of it. And you can do that anywhere.
Amazing. It's been awesome to speak to you, Victoria.
Same, Roy, same.
The Purveyor of Genuine Happiness. I love that title. So thanks for being here. And this is going to be shared on YouTube as well as Facebook as well. Once I've
Beautiful.
sorted out. Um, any other questions, highlights from anyone that's got this loved this, then please let's hear from you. It'd be great to know your feedback and what you get from it, and all highlights of again what gets repeated gets shared, and all of that stuff too. And is there any final things that are coming up for you that you want to share, Victoria?
Happy to be here with you. Just keep exploring the gap.
Yeah, amazing, amazing, amazing. Thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day, afternoon, evening, and be awesome. Cheers.
Cheers.